now I'm thinking about it. Thank you everybody for joining us for our chapter chat. It's the final one of this academic year, and I'm grateful that everybody's willing to take the time, especially our presenter, to join us and talk about a topic I'm really excited about because it relates to the theme that we are focusing on over the this year and next year. So I'm really excited and looking forward to this. I would like to extend a thanks also to the foundation, the Educational Foundation, for supporting this event and speaker. Is the Louise Young Lectureship, right, Melissa? Okay. So we're happy to be able to use those resources, and thank you for the support from the foundation. I am going to turn the time to Melissa to introduce our speaker, but I wanted to check really quick. Does anyone feel like they need an introduction to Zoom? I think we're, getting used to it now, but okay. And don't forget to put your name and chapter information in the chat. Okay, with that, Melissa, I will turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Well, I'm Melissa Martin, and I'm the National Executive Director for Phi Epsilon Omicron, and so excited to be with you all this evening for our 5th session in our Phi U Chapter Chat series, FCS Storytelling with Dr. Nancy Franz, Determining and Articulating the Value of FCS. So we're very honored to have Dr. Nancy Franz as our special guest speaker. She is Professor Emeritus from Iowa State University School of Education. Nancy retired after 33 years of service with the Cooperative Extension System. And most recently, she served as the Director for Professional Development, Associate Dean for Extension and Outreach, and Associate Dean and Director of Extension and Outreach to Families at Iowa State University. She also served as an extension agent, specialist, graduate student, and administrator over her life with extension systems in Wisconsin, New York, New Hampshire, Virginia, and Iowa. Her scholarly interests include determining conditions that promote transformative learning in non-formal learning environments and measuring and articulating extension program quality and value. She holds a PhD in agriculture, extension, and adult education from Cornell University, a master's in education, professional development from the University of Wisconsin-Superior, a Bachelors of Science in Environmental Studies and Outdoor Education Recreation. And as Jennifer, our national president, mentioned, this special session in our Phi U Chapter Chat series is graciously sponsored by the Phi Epsilon Omicron Educational Foundation's Louise Young Lectureship Fund. And we're so grateful for that support. So you can give a virtual or a real round of applause as we welcome Dr. Franz. And thank you for being here.
Good evening. I'm thrilled to be here. One of the fun things that I've discovered on Zoom is clap hands with the people on both sides of you. Can you do that on the screen? Look at that. You're giving each other a high five. All right. I'm thrilled to be here with you tonight and to see people from all over the country who are passionate about being connected with each other and learning more about how storytelling can help make family and consumer sciences be amplified for its value across the work that we do. So because tonight we're talking about storytelling and what it takes to create and share great stories about family and consumer sciences, I want to start with a story. So there were 6 of us sitting around the table. It was a Thursday evening. We were in Blacksburg, Virginia, in a Lutheran church. And the minister said, I know that if I brought the 6 of you together, we could make a difference. And we all sat up because we had no idea why we were there. The minister called us, said, I've got an idea. I want to run it past you. Well, basically what he had noticed and what we all knew is that we had neighbors who were hungry. And we wanted to do something about that. And so we discovered we could do that through the schools. We chose to start a backpack program. You probably are familiar with those by now. This was back in 2006 when it was all fresh. And we chose 6 backpacks to go to 6 children in one school to help it be filled with food to get them through the weekend because we wanted them not to be hungry. Well, that program took on a life of its own because at our first meeting, we decided What difference do we want to make? We want to start small, but we would love to reach every hungry child in the county. We want to make sure it's healthy food. We want to see that they're healthier and physically and mentally so they can be better students. They can be happier in their families, and they can be contributing citizens. We created that our first evening and measured that all the way along. By the time I left that community in 2010, we were reaching over 350 students. We knew they were feeding their whole family out of that backpack every weekend. We were including family and consumer science, science-based information in every backpack every week. Everything from how to do chores together as a family, to how to manage money, to how to use knives appropriately in the kitchen, to how to have pleasant surroundings in your home without spending a lot of money, how to brush your teeth, all kinds of wonderful things. And partners started coming on board, putting things in the backpacks, brand new, fresh toothbrushes and toothpaste for family members, toys that were learning mechanisms, books. And all of a sudden, this whole project had a life of its own. And then we saw spin-offs. You see this in the business world, not so often in the educational world. A spin-off, it was called Micah's Backpack. We had Micah's Clothing Closet. We had Micah's Food for Seniors. There were 4 or 5 different things that came out of those stories that we would tell. To the point where when I moved to Iowa and retired, the minister called me and said, Nancy, we're really missing you. We need you to help us write a book about this because so many people want to know our story. And so we did. In my retirement, we wrote a book about changing the world one backpack at a time. To the point where in the summertime, a bus was now owned by Micah's Backpack to take backpacks to children in their communities because they weren't in school. Librarians were on the bus to create kind of a bookmobile in every community. And there were even social workers who were going out to check on children as they would come to the bus for their food and their books. So you never know. One story of just wanting to make a difference so that children were not hungry could change total communities. That church and that effort had so many volunteers from the community that people wanted to buy the list of volunteers so they could contact them. Of course, we said, no, come and join us, and then you'll know us, and you won't need a list. So there's a story for you to think about, and I bet every one of you has a story, something similar to that, where you start with an idea, there's education involved, or there's some kind of family and consumer science aspiration that you have. But you haven't maybe told that story, or you haven't necessarily told it in a way that it's getting across what you'd like it to. So in the next half hour or so, I'm going to give you a bunch of tips and tools and ideas. I hope that you have a way to record it. Those of you who are at AAFCS with me in St. Louis a year and a half ago, we got these beautiful blue journals that were given to us, and I continue to record things in it, which reminds me, I forgot to record today's events in there. But it's a way to think about all of the stories that you may eventually want to tell, or people who you wish to engage, or tips that you want to remember. So hopefully you will start a way to start keeping track of that, whatever it may be. Some people are still even writing in their old-fashioned Palm Pilot on their palm, their hand. So let's go ahead and start with storytelling. So why do we need family and consumer science stories? Well, sadly, I've come to find over the years in my work with family and consumer science, whether it was as associate dean or as a county-based extension educator, or now as a consultant, is there aren't enough people who know us and love us. And I'm really sad about that, because if people don't know us, it's really hard for them to value us and to advocate for us and to join us in the great work that we do. So one of the reasons I want people to know FCS stories and hear them is so that they are aware of us and they know what value we bring to individuals as well as families, communities, and businesses. So one thing that I've got a favorite storyteller, his name is Jerry Apps, A-P-P-S. He writes stories about rural life, and he has novels. He was an extension educator. He was one of my first mentors. He writes a lot of great things. And so I follow a lot of his storytelling. And he says that our stories make us human, and it's through our stories that we communicate who we are to others. So the stories that we tell should be what we want people to know about us and our profession and the people we work with. So there are 3 reasons we need to tell stories, I think, about FCS. One is personal. I want people to know that the work that I'm doing is good work, and it's something that we need to share. I work with wonderful people. I see young people who have changed their lives due to the work. I've seen families who live better lives. I've seen organizations that go on to do wonderful things. I've also seen businesses and communities decide to stop doing things because it no longer makes sense. So personally, I need that to help me continue to do the good work because it's not easy work. I sometimes need the stories so that I can nominate my friends who are in teams with me for awards and grant proposals or maybe recognition. I need the stories to share in publications. And one that I will refer to in case you have more than one screen and you want to look it up. It's in the Journal of Family and Consumer Sciences, 2011. It's volume 103, number 4. Volume 103, that's over 100 years of the Journal of Family and Consumer Sciences. And the article is called Determining and Sharing the Public Value Story. Determining and Sharing the Public Value of Family and Consumer Sciences, Telling the Story. And I'm the first author, and then Margaret Van Ginkel. Some of you might know her if you are part of AAFCS. She's from Iowa and has been involved forever with AAFCS. She's the one who got me involved. And she joined me on this article, and I'll refer to it again later. So we have personal reasons to share our stories. One is to bring others in. Another is to get support for what you're doing. And the other is to just have people live better lives. I also tell stories about the FCS processes. I want people to know the unique ways we do things, the methods that we use. I want them to know our innovations. I want them to know who participates in what we do. I want them to know who my partners are, what we're learning, what we're celebrating, what relationships have. The FCS way of doing things. I want them to know the ethic of caring that we have in the family consumer science profession. Every time I go to a gathering, I am wonderfully reminded. Even tonight, people came on early to check on people's children, to talk about the pizza they had to eat, the important things in life, right? How often do you get to be parts of group that really care about you as a person as well as in the profession? It's a wonderful thing. So there are personal reasons, there's process reasons, and then there's product reasons, the 3 Ps of why we do stories. Product is about telling people what the results are of what we do, the why it's important. So why it's important to change the world with food, backpacks, or clothing. We discover when children are well fed, they have higher academic achievement. When they have higher academic achievement, they're more apt to be fully employed. They pay taxes. They are also apt to live healthier lives and do not increase healthcare costs for all of us. Wow, big stuff that we weren't sure that we would even know when we started as 6 people around the table, just wanting people not to be hungry. So we wanted to tell those stories that, look, here are our backpacks. Not only are these children not hungry, they're doing better in school, they're getting along better at home, and they're more engaged in their community. Some of those families even came to help pack the backpacks and deliver them. They wanted to give back. There are other things that we may want. We may want awareness. We may want support. And so you tell the story and then you give people ideas about what they can do. So you can support Micah's backpack. This week is peanut butter week. Just drop off a jar of peanut butter at this location and we'll make sure a family gets it. Or Super Bowl Sunday is also Super, S-O-U-P-E-R, Bowl Sunday, and bring a can of soup to wherever or at your local grocery store. Buy a can of soup and put it in the box and we will come by and get it and make sure it gets in the backpack. So finding ways to help people be aware and give them ideas for action. And then also telling stories, that's the value. Another one is the public value. So maybe if you don't want that specific individual to have a bowl of soup, but maybe you want to help at a higher level, maybe you want to donate $1,000 to help us support an intern, a family and consumer science student from the high school or the university who can work on this project and help us with nutritionally balanced meals, or can help us with our business plan, or can help us with recruiting students to come and help. The moment we did that, when we started at the systems level and we had students involved, we all of a sudden had the football team from Virginia Tech coming to pack backpacks. You would have thought that was the best. We walked on water after that. You just never know when you engage people in other ways. They want to work at a higher level. So telling those kinds of stories. So why we want to tell stories: for our personal benefit, for processes, and for product. And you know, that personal benefit can also be about Phi U, right? What are the things that you want to tell about this group? And maybe it's even just at the end saying the work we do is amplified by this organization. Join us if you're an FCS professional, and here's why. Or maybe it's this message brought to you by Phi U, your favorite whatever it might be. Those of you who are in marketing know that stuff really well. So that's why we do stories. Then we have to think about, once we know why we want to tell the stories, who do we want to have benefit from these stories? Are we talking about elected officials like school board members who want to close down the Family and Consumer Science program like they did in my community? Iowa State University has one of the preeminent family and consumer science programs in the nation. And our school board somehow didn't understand that they should value the family and consumer science program. And when they designed a new high school, there were no family and consumer science rooms. Well, you can bet a whole bunch of us got immediately on our white horses with very long lances and showed up very strongly. It didn't take very long for the new superintendent to understand there should have been a little more homework done. And we're now a good friend of hers because we help her understand a lot of issues that she didn't necessarily learn before. We also learned a lesson from that too, is that you cannot assume that people know us and love us. We've got to keep educating and telling stories all the time. So who needs to be valuing from these stories? So maybe it's you, the educator, because it helps you feel good, or it helps you evaluate how you're doing, or it helps you celebrate, or as the business owner, or whatever your family and consumer science role is. Maybe it's about telling a story for your colleagues so that you can recognize the good work that you're doing, so you can amplify each other's work. Maybe you can learn from each other's work, or you can provide therapy for each other when the work gets tough. Maybe there are some learners or clients or patrons who need to hear the story so that they come back to you, or if they don't know you yet, they come to you. Maybe your discipline needs to hear the story. If you're in food safety, or if you're in culinary arts, or if you're in interior design, whatever your discipline is, your content area, maybe that group of people is who needs to hear the story. Maybe the general public needs to hear the story. Boy, I can sure tell you, hand washing and the birthday song, family and consumer science folks have done really well since last March in a lot of ways. We've been talking about that for decades, and all of a sudden, we've got it. We're now all of a sudden talking about it on radio programs, on blogs, all over the place about why that's important. And then maybe again, it's decision makers who need to better connect with who we are and provide support. So that's why we tell stories and who might benefit from them. Now, let me tell you one of my favorite stories. This is by Jane Simpson McKimmon, and it's in her memoir from 1945. And the story of the memoir, the title is When We're Green, We Grow, the story of home demonstration work in North Carolina. Do we have anybody from North Carolina online? I didn't see that, but there might be someone there. So as I read the story, you can close your eyes if you wish, or just listen, and I bet it'll come alive for you. In 1912, there was no assistant provided to help me, and I was almost constantly traveling to each of the 14 counties in my jurisdiction. One day, as I came down a long red clay road with the August heat shimmering in the dust before me, the driver flicked the flies from his horse, and I wondered, what had I done in this life that I should be traveling on that dreary road with the thermometer hovering around 90 degrees to teach somebody how to can tomatoes? But as the old horse and I rounded a bend in the road, the answer came in the smoke curling from two big canners, which were puffing away on the courthouse green, and in the 50 or more girls who were peeling fruit, filling cans, and getting ready for my coming. What did trials behind and obstacles ahead matter to these young people? Difficulties were just things to be climbed over or thrust out of the way by the tremendous urge that was driving them. It wasn't canning. What was driving them was an opportunity to do something and be something. And I've never regretted that the means provided for its accomplishment was a plain, everyday garden with country girls we're familiar with. It was also a knowledge of how to turn the products of that garden into an income from which came spiritual as well as material blessings. What a wonderful story. Just doesn't it fill you with the warmth of helping others? And it tells not just the content of doing food preservation. It tells us about youth development. It tells us about community development. It tells us about the value of providing meaning in people's lives. And in the midst of COVID, my gosh, isn't that just exactly what we all need? How many people have turned back to gardening and canning in this last year? It's pretty amazing. Yeah, even Drew Barrymore, I hear, has started her own garden. Pretty fascinating. So no matter who people are, there are stories we can tell that connect with you, not just with content, but with emotion. So that's a story to keep in mind when we think about who is that story for. That story is for people like me, who was a county extension educator, who would drive hours and hours in Wisconsin along Lake Superior at minus 70-degree wind chills to go out to little town halls where a dozen people would be waiting for me to do joyful things together. And I would have my feet not unthaw for hours until after I got home. It speaks to me. It speaks to my colleagues who've done hard work and have long hours, but can see the results in the people they work with. It speaks to the young girls on the lawn. Who are those people, the customers who come in our doors to find something to make their lives better? It speaks to the people in food preservation, or maybe in education, that values or affirms the value of the work, or the industry. I would think the Ball Canning Company would love that story. The audience could be an audience that's looking for entertainment, just a great story, would make a great little movie video clip. Maybe it's a happiness story. Maybe it's a story of self-worth and spirituality. Maybe it's a story for the public about the value of food preservation at this time in our lives. Or maybe it's a story for decision makers that we could use to say, hey, look, it's not 1912 anymore. In fact, it's over 100 years, and yet we still need to help people understand the value of healthy food, of gardens, of food preservation, of inexpensive ways to live great lives. So you never know when a story is going to be useful. So always be on the look for stories and putting notes however you may. So why, who, and then the types of stories. There are stories that are about our people-centered science. There are stories about discoveries in family and consumer science through research or practice. There are stories about developing that science to help us better navigate the world around us as it changes. There are stories about dissemination or methods, the family and consumer science way of getting things out there in the world. There are stories about people learning from us. There are types of stories about people doing things differently in their lives because of us. And then there are stories about condition change, whether that change is social change. You can see the young women on the lawn who grow up to be well-adjusted young women who are able to manage their domestic economy. I love that term. The first Family and Consumer Sciences director at Iowa State called it domestic economy. We all need domestic economy right now, and so does our government. And so maybe that story is for people to understand condition change at the social level, maybe the environmental level. I bet we could tie home canning to decreasing global climate issues. And then there's also, of course, economic. And in this day and age, economic value tends to override lots of other kinds, even though I like to tell all three kinds. So there's stories about our science. Then there's stories outside our science, which might be about our identity, who we are as a profession or as a group. They might be about our reputation. What do people know about us? I can't tell you how often I still have to help people understand family and consumer sciences as today's home economics, or today's domestic economy, or today's family living. Help people catch up to where we are. Sometimes the stories of outsider science are about our culture, especially when I'm working with young adults who are trying to figure out what they want to do in life. Do they want to be in a profession where they feel cared for and they wish to care for others? It's not just the health professions, it's also family and consumer sciences. And oftentimes, especially young men who are finding that parts of the male traditional careers for them just don't fit, find family and consumer science a very good home for them. And then our relationships and our heart. What are the stories we could tell about? We could talk about our origins and our history. We can talk about our practice, the way we do things. And we can talk about the changes that we make, who we are and who we're becoming and who we're helping others become. And then a third type of story. So there's our science stories, there's outsider science, and then there's stories by length, right? There's just the real traditional functional. There are statements. We may tell stories that are 1 to 3 sentences long that you use. We call them the elevator speech, right? And I have to tell you, I've lived in places where there's only 2 elevators in the whole county. And, so we don't get to give elevator speeches very often. But there is very often the high on the street where you're passing someone, or you see them briefly, no matter where you are, where 1 to 3 sentences is all you need. And maybe it's something about, I work with Micah's backpack. We feed young people once a week with a backpack to help them be better members of our community. That's a story right there, right? And I'm assuming people already know about hunger. Sometimes I may have to say, that 1/5 of the students in our school systems go home hungry every day. And that I may need to have to tell a story in that part too. So there are statements, which are the shortest length of story. Then there are short stories, which are 1 to 3 pages. And so I have one here that looks, when I have those tulips up behind me, you can't see them. I'm going to take my tulips down. If I can do that. Oh, well, it didn't go. I'll try to hold it right. So here's a story that's got 1 front page and 1 back page, and that's all there is to it. And then I have another story about family consumer sciences and what it does for people in prisons. That's basically 4 pages long. And then you may have reports or documents. Sometimes they're from a large project or from a research program that are 10 to 50 pages long. And those can be really in depth. They can give all the details and they can tell a story too. But I find they better have an executive summary that's less than 2 pages or most people won't read them. I can see Jennifer smiling. She knows that. So many different kinds. Most often the one you're going to be telling is that short one of statements and then those 1 or 2 pages. So then I've gotten us through the why we should tell, the who we should tell, the types of stories. Now we finally get to what story should we tell? I've been giving you lots of ideas as we go along, but I really think there are 2 kinds of stories. There are private value stories and there are public value stories. And that's what that Journal of Family and Consumer Science article is about. So a private value story is how family and consumer sciences benefits an individual or a family or a business, something that's pretty close in. A public value story talks about why what family and consumer sciences does is helpful or impactful or beneficial to people who aren't a part of the project or program or service. And so in many instances, we find those of us who are working with public money, we have to tell that story to elected officials so they can tell it to the people in their election areas, the area they serve, who may not necessarily have children in the school taking family and consumer science classes, or have students at that university that has family and consumer science courses or programs or research, or have people in a community where the project is not taking place, but it's still of value to them. So let me give you some ideas of the contrast between the 2, because it can be kind of hard to leap from one to the next. So private value would be when we as family and consumer science professionals help people improve their personal health, and from increased intake of fruits or vegetables, or reduction of sugar, or whatever it might be. That's the private value. The public value is decreased healthcare costs. So we know from the science that when people eat in more healthy ways, specifically certain amounts so often per day or less of, we know that they have better health. It reduces chronic issues, which save healthcare. And some people can, even if you work with an economist, get it down to the exact amount of money. And I have some examples. So improved personal parenting skills, that's the private value. When we help people become better parents, the public value is decreased juvenile crime. We also have science that shows that connection. And when we have decreased juvenile crime, we have less costs. We have less public costs to pay for the court system. Another private value would be reduction of individual or family debt because of family finance, education, or work. The public value is decreased dependence on public assistance due to fewer bankruptcies. So there's, again, it's a leap, but it's something that we know, we've got science behind that we can show it's true, that when we help individuals with this, it contributes towards those larger changes. Another private value would be reduced energy or reduced water use due to installation of home water saving devices, appliances, and practices. What does that mean for the public? And this is really big, especially in municipalities with public services. Decreased municipal infrastructure costs and fewer brownouts and blackouts. Those of you from Texas would know people who went through that terrible snowstorm and loss of power. Those who knew how to deal with energy issues were probably healthier and in better shape than those who weren't prepared. Extension and other family and consumer science organizations in high schools, in clubs. I've seen wonderful programs where people put together hurricane kits and earthquake kits and power outage kits and go bags, that when families have those, that they've gotten through our work, they tend to be more resilient during and coming out of those emergencies. And then another thing that we work with, even though we don't always promote this, but we do it constantly, is we help improve personal life and leadership skills, especially when we're working with young people in junior high and high schools. I see this a lot. And when we help them improve their personal living skills and their leadership skills, the public value is that they tend to be more contributing citizens in their communities. They serve in public roles, they volunteer, they provide supports in their communities. So those are some differences between private and public value. So now that I've given you all of that, I want to give you, I'm going to give you about 10 more minutes of things and then time for us to have some conversation. But I want to give you some story elements. And the best stories have 6 elements. And this comes from my friend, George Morse. He used to be an economist in Minnesota. Amazing that I get along with an economist. It's not usually where I'm at with my human sciences. But he actually is a volunteer in Maine now, working with his library, telling stories about their human sciences. And this is what he's found after 10 years of doing this work. I'm one of his story reviewers. Number 1, your story must have real people. So if you're talking to someone and you know someone in their community or their family or their business or their school or their organization, invoke a story about them. The second thing is it's got to be about a real issue. So the Micah's backpack story, one of the issues there was hunger. One of the issues was low resource family survival. Another issue was school achievement. The story in 1912 in canning, that was not just about having low resources and being able to have fresh food canned for you out of your garden in the middle of winter for health, get that good vitamin C out of those tomatoes. It's also about meaning and about finding your place. The third thing is there needs to be some intervention by you or your organization or your business. What did you do in order to help address the issue? And then you need to have a happy ending. because people oftentimes, all they remember is the last thing you said in your story. So is the last thing you said, for example, the 1912 story, her last phrase was, it was also a knowledge of how to turn the products of that garden into an income from which came spiritual as well as material blessings. The only word someone may remember was that she was a home economist in 1912, brought blessings to that community. Happy ending. And also provide a single fact, one thing that you want people to know. And maybe it's what percent of people in your community are hungry? Or is it when people in our community are hungry, they commit crimes? Or what is that fact that you want them to know? And then have a tagline. And some of my favorite taglines from Family and Consumer Sciences. Family and Consumer Sciences changes lives. It's one of my favorites. You better be able to tell them how, right? Because the story is going to tell that, and you may finish with, and this is how we change lives. Family and Consumer Science transforms communities. So maybe it's a group of students, maybe they're in Hero and some other FCS student club, and they're doing things in their community. What are they doing to improve their community? They're transforming, they're changing their community from here, where it is, to here, where they want it to be. Or Family and Consumer Sciences is a smart investment. That's a really good one to use with elected officials who their finances determine what you'll get. Or if you own a business and your customers, you want them to come back and invest in you. Why should they continue to invest in you rather than going to Amazon? And sometimes you might need to say, we help people lead better lives. We help people be work and career ready. We build strong families. Or we make meaningful contributions to communities. Those are all taglines you can use at the end or as your title that zeroes in on why you're telling that story and what's that one fact that shows that. So those are some important things that might be helpful as the elements in a good story. So with that in mind, I want to give you a few tips and tools or lessons I've learned in storytelling. We've all been telling stories for years and years and years, and you're going to probably share some of your tips and tools next too. Is we need to develop and deliver a purposeful core message, a story that stirs a soul. Oh, I love that. I don't know who I borrowed that from, but how can our story stir a soul? For some folks, nobody wants children to be hungry. For some folks, nobody wants people to be in the hospital because their diabetes has gotten out of control. For some people, we don't want anybody to live in a home that isn't cheerful, where a little bit of interior design can make their lives so much happier, especially these days when we're spending life more closer to home. Intentionally target your audience. You may want to have visuals or presence that help your message, whether you're wearing a name tag that's telling who you are, or maybe your very professional outfit that's something about what you're saying, or the materials that you're handing people have your logo at the top, or whatever it might be. The visual is just as important. And you may have noticed when I told the 1912 story, I was doing a few things with my hands as well as my voice inflection. Be selective about who you choose for your stories. We oftentimes think one size fits all. If I tell the story and I get it out there and everybody hears it, life will be fine. Well, one size does not fit all. Just think about when you're listening to the radio or watching the news on TV, which stories resonate with you, which stories might resonate with someone else, which is why there's oftentimes commentary that goes with a news story or multiple sides to appeal to a wider variety of people. The story has to be believable. You have to have your facts. You have to know where they came from and how they were reached. And maybe even specifically what research showed that. This is what I've learned the hard way. Pilot your stories to make sure they work with your intended audience. You don't want to create a story, get it out there to all the school board members, and then realize there's something in it that doesn't click or maybe even potentially offends them, or works against what they're trying to accomplish or what their culture is. So pilot it with somebody who either knows the audience well or is from that audience, and they can give some great tips. Or even better, write the story with them. What I do is I oftentimes write a story, put it in front of the person and ask, can I put your name on it? Would you approve it? And they didn't have to do any work. They may give me some tips and tools, but the credibility that it gives that story when that key person shows up, that key influencer. Don't wait to tell family and consumer science stories when we're cut from the budget or we're in trouble. It's too late. Storytelling should be now and always about who we are and why we're important and why we need support. Make sure you involve the stakeholders in your storytelling, whether it's asking someone to write it with you. I can't tell you how impactful it is whenever I've gone to the legislature and I've brought along family and consumer science partners to talk or share a little bit of their story. It's much more meaningful than me telling their story, because they're oftentimes in someone's voting district, or they're in their neighborhood, or they know their family, and that's really helpful. And then go ahead and try conducting storytelling experiments. So one experiment that I love that I did with a group of students in an FCS high school club is I gave them all the old disposable cameras. Now we just tell them to take their phones and go out and take pictures in your community of things you're proud of. They brought all these stories back in. We created photo collages and little stories about what they were proud of. The next time I sent them out and said, now take stories of things that you think could be better. They brought those in. We did collages. We wrote about what's wrong with this, why could it be better? We put them side by side and did a final collage of photos and drawings and words about what can we do and what we like to address what we don't like and what do we need to do. It was basically a community developed strategic plan, totally it's called photo voice, where you tell your story using a photo. And these days, especially with things like TikTok and Instagram, etc., videos and photos are actually some of our best storytelling. And then make sure that you help interpret a story as well as tell it. So I've told the story about 1912. I've told the story about Micah's backpack. And as we've gone through this short time together, I've given bits and pieces of the interpretation. It's kind of the so what. I've told you the story. So what? Okay. So I've told you the story about Micah's backpack. Now what I need from you is think about in your life what you can do to help your neighbors live better lives. Or what can you do? Come join us and be volunteers. Or what can you do to help decrease the amount of hunger in your community? Whatever it might be, giving people the so what answer. And so I'm just going to close quickly with what I think are 3 important things. If you didn't take notes and now you all of a sudden feel like it, or you had something else going on and you're just joining us now and you want to know what this whole thing was about. The first thing is that stories are a way of life for all of us. Make sure you capture stories as you live life, whether it's a journal, or it's something that you're keeping as a document, or photos, or drawings, or poetry, but keep track of the stories in some way. Share your joys and frustrations through stories. What stories keep you happy and passionate about your work? What needs to change and how? So the first one, stories are a way of life. Don't let them get away from you. Share your joys and frustrations. And then third, use stories to more deeply and widely enhance the meaning and value of family and consumer sciences. What culture of family and consumer sciences do our stories reveal? What do we want people to know about us? Look at the stories we're already telling. Do they tell the stories we want them to? And then help celebrate whatever anniversaries and celebrations there are in your family and consumer science world by strategically sharing stories. In fact, wouldn't it be a great time in life to create more and more celebrations? It doesn't have to be a 25th anniversary or a 30th this or a first of that. Let's find ways all the time to have celebrations about family and consumer sciences. So I'm thrilled I could share a few things about my life with storytelling. I would love to hear your questions, your comments, things you've learned about telling stories in family and consumer sciences. So feel free to, on mic, open your phone if you want to share something. But we also know in the Zoom world, it's hard, but to be one at a time, but we also have to kind of try that too, or we talk over each other. So go ahead. Who would like to start? If someone's trying to talk, you've muted your microphone. Melissa, go ahead.
I'll start. I just want to say thank you for all of the wonderful tips that you've shared with us. I'm a talker just naturally, and I find that I make so many great connections at conferences by talking about things that maybe aren't directly related to what we're there for, but it's how we remember people and how we resonate. And I did have the opportunity to hear you speak at AAFCS, and those are the things that stick with us. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in talking to ourselves, in a sense, in a professional light, that we sometimes forget the impact and the power of storytelling by just using the stories that, really come second nature to us to, share the value of FCS, especially with those stakeholders you talked about.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And, part of where that comes from is I've discovered that those of us who do family and consumer science work is we're pretty humble. We're definitely not doing it for the money, right? And we're not doing it for the fame. And so it feels like boasting to tell some of these stories, where in fact, other people in other occupations, they don't see it as boasting at all. It's what they do, right? Come and love me. Here's my story. And so it can be hard to tell our own stories. So sometimes we have to tell other people's stories for them. And that happens so much at conferences. Oh my gosh, you get to see each other. You just talked with so-and-so. Have you talked to so-and-so? Have you heard their story about, they've got this great project they're doing, or they've got this neat new thing that they've tried. They've got this quilting group that also does wine. And then at the same time, they do financial management. Oh, I like that combination. So yeah, it's important to not forget that storytelling is not boasting usually. It's just another way to help people get a sense of who we are and that we care about them. Good, thank you. Kyle, did you want to share something? I noticed you have your mic on.
No, I think I just didn't mute again, but I'm having terrible bandwidth issues at the hotel here.
Well, you look fine.
Thanks.
I see that Martha has her microphone active. Martha Jenkins, did you want to make a comment or ask a question?
Well, I think storytelling is a great way to tell our story to other people, and without bragging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And if you even think about, I talk to my mom on the phone every Sunday evening, and a lot of our conversation is storytelling about what's happened during our week. And why aren't we having that kind of conversation with a wider variety of people? What has Family and Consumer Sciences done this week or done today? Or, and so I have a couple examples. I was finally able to take down the tulips from my campus garden that were frozen shut in the snow on Monday. They were like this, protecting their insides. So, for example, this is a postcard that I got from the College of Human Sciences on campus. And it probably went to every supporter that's ever either been employed, graduated, or gave money, right? And really the reason for sending this was they want money to remodel a really old, crappy building. And you probably know from a lot of places that family and consumer science facilities usually don't get the same financial support as engineering or business or some other disciplines. And so some of the things I really liked about this is on one side, it talks all about what needs to be done for the construction. But on the other side, it gives 4 bullet points of how the college is impacting Iowans. So the College of Human Sciences at Iowa State University contributes to $3.4 billion of economic impact in the state of Iowa. Now, they have a little number there that takes you to, it doesn't take you to the back. It should take you to the back to tell you what the source of that was. Oh, here it is. It's from an economic value of Iowa State report. So they do send the source. It prepares professionals who improve the quality of people's lives, yada, yada. 61% of graduate found employment. Oh, that should be higher. And that graduates become leaders who strengthen family, schools, and communities. So they give 4, kind of bullet points. 23,000 alumni live and work in Iowa. That's really important to Iowans when this institution has got a lot of state tax money in it. And then handwritten right underneath it, it says, have you seen this? Handwritten. And I know exactly who sent that and whose handwriting that is. Here's a friend of mine who works in that office, Danette Mosier. You may even know her from AAFCS. Yes. She sent me this card and wrote, have you seen this? And so, of course, because Danette put her little note on there, I read it and then got together with her and went for a walk and talked about it. And then there are some challenges, etc. But a great way to get this to people to tell a story. And then I could carry it in wherever and share it as well. So that's an example. Another example.
Nancy, Danette
Please.
is a Phi U chapter advisor also.
Oh, how wonderful. Oh, I will be sending her a note right away after this then. She and I need to get together as soon as I get my second shot. So other things that you might see, this is what I was trying to show you earlier. This is at Texas. They created, this is Texas Cooperative Extension, because I did a workshop with them on the economic impact brief about their Walk Across Texas program. When people participate in this Walk Across Texas program, yada, 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 as much as annual healthcare costs for people, this much savings, etc. They had another one that had a really interesting piece in it. 50% of participants report feeling decreased stress after participating. That's important these days. They have the potential to save a collective $127,240,868 in future healthcare costs. You could tell that I know the economist there. He does a really good job of helping put that kind of stuff into it. And then there are stories that look like this. You may have received this in the mail. Carolyn Jackson, right? This is the story, My Family Consumer Sciences Story. This came after our time together in St. Louis with AAFCS, where she tells the story about working, managing Dick Nicholas's congressional campaign, and how he said, she has this little insert, you know, Susan, I think it's the person with the family and consumer sciences educational background that makes the best campaign manager. Now, who would think that? Who would know that? Who would say, well, I'm looking for a campaign manager. Where are the family and consumer science folks? Not necessarily. They're looking for who served as an aide to so-and-so or who's been an elected official, when in fact, you want somebody who can organize dang well and help people get along well with each other. Yeah, so a wide variety of ways a story can be told. Another way a story can be told is to look like a recipe card, right? And this one I've seen done before, where whatever your goal is, like reducing hunger in children, 1 cup of volunteers, one of this, and then a belief in mixing it all together is the story of what you did and your impact. Yields 1 happy community, right? Or more well-adjusted young people, or whatever it might be. So lots of different ways you can tell stories. Who else? Anybody? Come on, feel free to jump in.
I have a comment because this, like I said, I'm excited about this topic, but one of the things I really enjoy about storytelling is, which you mentioned, kind of, what are you trying to ask? What's your ask for people? And so stories have a way of inspiring people to take whatever action it is that you're trying to do. And so that inspirational part is what I really enjoy about storytelling. And that's the theme for our year is inspiring others through FCS storytelling. So and I had to look it up to see, but just as a reminder for everybody, this is from the candle, but that's what our logo and theme is for this year. But that's my favorite piece. And so I liked how you mentioned that it we're trying to get people to do something, some kind of outcome. So I liked that part.
Yeah, and really, what happens when we inspire others, we tend to re-inspire ourselves and recommit ourselves too. Yeah. And sometimes, I didn't mention this, but something else I've learned is sometimes we have to make people feel a little uncomfortable in the story so that we can give them the happy ending. And so the discomfort might be, well, we've got these kids who are hungry. Kids should never be hungry. Why would a child be hungry in this community? We've got more than enough food. Right. And so making them a little bit uncomfortable in order to get them to engage further in the story. Yeah. Good. All right. Melissa, you've got a hand up, I see?
Yeah, I just wanted to also add, just with the group that we have here, one thing that you talked about was closing of departments, even, at middle school and high school levels, but we're even seeing that happen now as colleges are having to make some tough decisions, and also some fragmenting of departments. And as far as Phi U is concerned, sometimes that leaves us on a slippery slope, because our chapters feel as though they can't get their arms around all of the different areas that make up family consumer sciences once they're kind of dispersed across campus. So I think for each of us, even on this call, if you wanted to leave with an action plan, or, kind of what is your goal with your storytelling, I think you can start right where you are, even in your own, campuses and universities, because I know just from where I sit, from the national level for Phi U, it is something that we're seeing.
And part of the reason I think we're seeing that, whether it's at the middle school, high school, college level, university level, it's because people don't know us. They're making the decisions based on some outmoded or misunderstood storyline of who we are, right? So I've been through that here at Iowa State. There was a family and consumer science education program that was a cohort program that was very popular, very accessible for people in evenings and weekends, and allowed people who are currently teaching or in jobs to get their master's degree or their bachelor's degree. And that program was gotten rid of because I can't figure it out, but I think it became inconvenient for people on campus. And those of you who know higher education, it's not very good at being proactive or innovative. It's pretty constipated. It's pretty, old, back in old ways of doing things. And so there weren't enough people telling the story of why the cohort model was important. And so I ended up with several graduate students. In fact, my last one, I've been retired 7 years. My last one just graduated in May, who was an FCS teacher in a high school who couldn't finish her degree because they got rid of the cohort program. And so she had to go through the general studies master's program. And what she did is I talked her into doing her master's project on FCS storytelling, specifically focused on school boards, board of regents, and elected officials. And she has a background in marketing. And because we saw over and over again, either people have a kind of 1960s or 70s version of, we'll teach you how to use your microwave view of, family and consumer sciences. Most people don't know the leadership development story at all. That's really undertold and is really important right now. We also don't necessarily, it's not the bragging, but we don't have a plan for being in people's way, for being there where we need to be. We expect them to come to us. We expect decision makers to come to us and ask us for information, when in fact we need to be in their world and not lobbyists. I can't tell you how engaged I am with my elected officials right now. There are some who are not trainable that I don't spend time with because it's not working. But those who even know me and know exactly what I am and value, I continue to feed them stuff because they have people they work with that they're not sure how to tell the story, even though they are behind it. They need to convince others. So it's what's really taught me over probably the last 15 years as I've watched support for family and consumer science education erode, is that we just need to be in more places more often, telling more stories of why people need to value us, even if they aren't in our programs. Yeah. And that can be hard because we got enough to do already, right? So that's why we need to get all these young interns helping us with this. Or lots of folks who are great with social media and other ways of reaching people.
Can you speak on digital storytelling? Have you got much experience with that?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of personal experience with that. But I serve on the board of our county conservation board, and we're finding that social media is exactly where we have to be putting more time. What we have right now is we've got 5 generations we're trying to appeal to. And that's at least 5 very different ways of communicating. And so we pretty much have down pat the print newsletter and the news releases to the newspaper. which reach maybe 10% of our audience right now. It's pretty low, pretty low. And then we've got people, the next generation or so that's on Facebook. And then we've got the Twitter and Instagram people. And then we've got a whole slew of people that are just about videos. And we're not just on social media, but putting those videos on your website, putting those videos, some people are embedding them in their email signatures, right? The link to a video that tells who they are, rather than just here's my email. They're using their signature line on their video to connect, like we've done with the FCS logo. You know how we've put that in our email? They're now embedding video clips in there, or Facebook links or whatever. So I don't have a lot of experience directly, but I have to tell you that working with good outreach people right now is critical, or communications folks. And video seems to be just going absolutely crazy. I volunteer at my public library, and I'm just absolutely amazed what they're doing with video at this point in time. Anybody who's in the classroom is probably using a lot of videos right now too. Would anybody else like to share their experiences with communicating with social media or other ways these days that seem to be reaching a wider variety or a different group of people with stories? It's important to know key influencers and providing them with stories. They may not use them right away. Don't be disappointed, but they may at least remember that you tried to help them. And they may not know exactly where they put the stories, but they know that you gave them to them. And if it's not them directly, the people they know. So I've had some non-trainable elected officials, and I get to know either yeah, I see some laughter. You may know a few. And I get to try to know a spouse, a family member, or an aide, or a friend who might be able to influence them in some ways. And again, sometimes it doesn't work. But, you know, I try to stay focused on the goal, which is we want the people you represent to live better lives, or to be better behaved, or to, you know, reelect you. And this is how I can help you.
I probably should have asked her to join us, even though she's not a Phi U member, but Barbara Scully is doing a podcast, Connect FCS Ed. Have you heard of that?
I've heard of it, but I've not listened.
Yes?
I've not listened to it.
It's worth a listen, because she brings people on and basically tells their story. And I think it's a great resource for us to get some of our Phi U members. She's always looking for content. And she's just a really nice lady. I've talked to her once. She wants me on, but I haven't done it yet, but she has had a couple of our faculty. And to me, that's a sense of digital storytelling, because you're using digital media and then you can go back to it. And I just think it would be neat if we could get, because we have a wealth of experience right here that I can see in front of us, with all great stories behind why they're where they're at. And if we could get them on that podcast to tell their story there, I think it would be a good way to, you know, talk out there amongst even people in our profession need to hear the stories of what Phi U does, not just FCS
And so get a little assertive about that and create a plan to send to her of people like, here are 6 people, here's who they are, here's what they do, here's a storyline, here's the way you can contact them. And we want you to do this because, and it's not to promote Phi U, but brought to you by Phi U, right? But it's about how, you know, we are making the world a better place. And you're right, podcasts are really important for a certain segment of the population. And I don't have the statistics on who's listening to that, other than I know who my friends are.
It's going to be the 23 to 27-year-olds, because that's all my daughters talk about. It's podcast.
Oh, yeah. And I have friends in their 40s too. Yeah. I have friends in their 40s.
Yeah, you got to listen to this one.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And that's oftentimes just do experiments. Who do you want to reach? And then what are they paying attention to? What gets them excited?
Who was that one? Wait, Kyle, who is that? And is that an existing podcast that you
Barbara
just mentioned?
Scully. Yeah, it's Barbara Scully, and it's Connect FCS Ed is the name of the podcast.
Great.
I can maybe find it and put it in the chat link.
And someone else has already put in the chat box where you can send some of your stories to National Phi U. So write that down and do that. So, well, my time with you has gone by really quickly, and appreciate you asking me to join you this evening and getting me re-enmeshed in my stories and thinking about some more action I need to take. So I hope that you find this valuable to you as a professional, as a person, and as an organization. I hope that you'll find some more ways to tell the stories of the wonderful ways you're making a difference in the world. So thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Franz. We really appreciate it, and I learned a lot. Took a lot of notes. I'm one of the note takers on my notebook. And I wanted to recognize also Dr. Kyle Robertson, who had a big role in organizing all of this. So was there anything you would like to add, Kyle, before we say goodnight to everyone?
Well, I want to apologize for being late to my invited guest. I got stuck in traffic, but I joined as quick as I could. And then we're having connection issues here in the hotel. But I'm so glad you joined us tonight. I remember you from St. Louis and just really enjoyed your oops, I don't know if somebody else is talking over, but anyway, I thank you for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. And we do want to get our stories out there, and you've given us some tools to help do that.
Thank you again. And thank you everybody for joining us. I hope the rest of your year goes well, and we'll be picking up again with more chapter chats back in the fall when we come back for the next academic year. So best of luck to everybody as we end out our year, and we'll see you next time.